Welcome to the Nick Hilera Show. This is the place where we explore big ideas with people having a big impact on our world. I'm your host, Nick Hilera, serial entrepreneur, author, early morning riser, and seeker of truth and wisdom. Join me as we explore the journeys and discoveries of fascinating people who are literally unlocking the secrets to creating a life of both success and fulfillment. Each episode will arm you with insights, ideas, and practical perspectives on what it takes not only to be financially and personally successful, but also how to start having authentic impact on the world around you. Welcome everybody back to the Nick Hilera Show. Today I am welcoming a friend of mine and one of the most interesting people I know, Pat Dykstra, who is is an individual it's hard to say what he does for a living because he's doing so many different things and they're so unusual. But he's an award-winning cinematographer. He's a host of documentary and TV shows, and he's an ocean adventurer and a photographer and a person who has been out doing what he loves for the better part of 2 decades now. And excited to have this conversation. Pat, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Dick. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I figured there's a lot of places we could start just given all this stuff you're up to, but I figured maybe we go back. You spend a huge percentage of your time on the ocean looking for large animals. And I'd love to hear the origin story. Like, how did you get into that? Where did the passion come for that? This is something you always knew you wanted to do?
Well, I grew up in Kansas and Colorado, so about as far from the ocean as you can get on planet Earth. So it is a bit surprising to find myself spending some years 200 days out at sea. But it did have a fairly distinct beginning. I was an intern for Kansas Senator Pat Roberts in Washington, D.C. I'd volunteered on his campaign. I was in high school. I was 15 or 16 years old and was curious what I was going to do with my life. And he was running for the Senate, and I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't right-leaning or left-leaning. I had no politics at the time. But I just saw an opportunity to learn what life in politics might be like. And so I went into his campaign office and volunteered. And I was the yard sign guru. So they had me knocking on doors, asking people to put yard signs in their yard at 15, 16 years old, which was kind of fun. And then as a reward for that, he asked me to be an intern in Washington, D.C. the following summer. And so I accepted that just as an opportunity to learn, what does a politician do? What does a senator do? Is this a life I might like? But I was by far the youngest intern he had. Everybody else was 21 and over, all college students. So I couldn't attend a lot of the interesting events because there was alcohol and they were quite serious about not getting in trouble for having a 16-year-old at these parties. So I spent a lot of time just hanging out, going to do stuff by myself around Washington. And one of the things I would do is go to the Smithsonian museums, in part because I was poor and they were free, and in part because I found them interesting. And so I just wander around and go to these places. And I went to the Air and Space Museum, and then I went to the Natural History Museum, and I was wandering around the Sea of Life, I think it was called. And I came around the corner in the Sea of Life exhibit, and there was this massive blue whale sculpture hanging from the ceiling. And this thing was bigger than the airplanes that I had seen at the Air and Space Museum a couple hours earlier. And I just thought, man, that is the craziest thing. That cannot be the actual size of a living animal on Earth. Because the biggest thing I'd seen in person to that point was like horses. And this thing was so incredibly large. So I went over there, and there were 2 plaques below this sculpture. And the first one just had a bunch of dinosaurs on it and a blue whale. And it said the blue whale is the biggest animal to ever inhabit the planet, bigger than some long extinct dinosaur, which is what I would have thought was the biggest. And then next to that was a plaque that was a timeline of life on Earth. And humans were way at the end. This teeny little 200,000 year sliver way at the end of this timeline was when humans evolved, we think. And then also a pretty small sliver towards the very end of this long timeline is where blue whales evolved. And I just thought that's the craziest thing, that our fingernail size sliver actually fully overlaps with the also really small sliver of the largest animal to ever inhabit the planet. So it's not some brontosaurus or some long extinct dinosaur. I was like, this is crazy that I could go out today, perhaps, and go like be next to the living biggest animal to ever inhabit the planet. I thought, what a crazy quirk of fate that is, that like in my lifetime we could do that. I'm doing it. And so, then I went down this road of where can you find blue whales and how do you get in the water with them and is it safe? And I'm 43 now, so this was at 16 was pre-internet. So I ended up reading a lot of books, talking to scientists, going to conferences, and just trying to find where in the world I can see a blue whale. And then I saved up. I spent all my money from waiting tables. This led over into college to try to go find where I could find a blue whale. And they're tough. And especially when you don't have as much data as is easily accessible now. And so I ended up spending a lot of days out at sea finding other whales, fin whales, sperm whales, whale sharks, killer whales. And I was swimming and going in the water with all of these things. And it was a fascinating journey to go find them. But it was years later, it was really 2009 during the Sri Lankan Civil War that I had looked at some bathymetric charts and found that there was a big canyon off southern Sri Lanka that potentially would have blue whales, but there was a civil war going on and you weren't allowed to travel freely in the country. You certainly weren't allowed to have an engine bigger than 15 horsepower to go offshore and try to find these, because the Tamil Tigers were having suicide missions, running boats into Navy ships. So there was a really crazy time in Sri Lanka. But I went anyway, and we found a fisherman who would take me out to sea, a buddy of mine and I, and we went out to sea 10 miles offshore in southern Sri Lanka, 2007. But lo and behold, there was blue whales. And then I sort of achieved this dream of swimming with a blue whale. But along that journey, I got a lot of experience swimming with all kinds of whales and sort of fell in love with the ocean and what you can find out there in the ocean. And it's still just amazing to me, even in this day and age, even now, even this year, as just a regular dude. I eventually became a lawyer, but just as like a regular guy, you can go out in the ocean and do literally world first things. Like I filmed the world's first footage of blue whales nursing. No one had ever got that on camera before. Didn't know if it happened at the surface, down at depth. But, it's without a marine biology degree, without being a zoologist, without any training, you can, with enough passion and a little bit of work ethic, there are still things in the ocean that no one has ever seen before that you or me or any regular person could go out and be literally the first person in the world to see and discover and document all sorts of things. We just know so little about it. So that's pretty awesome. So that's kind of where it began.
That's fascinating. So this place in Sri Lanka, my understanding from our previous conversations about it, is unique because the reason a blue whale is difficult to swim with is because they just disappear as soon as they see any human being. But in Sri Lanka, they're nursing. And so they have their babies with them or something like that, right?
Yeah, they're swimming slower, they're feeding. And now this is interesting because I suspect it's due to global warming. But if you went today to that same place in Sri Lanka, there are no longer blue whales there. That has completely changed. I don't know how long the window was, but they've barely seen a blue whale there. They see maybe one a year for the past 3 years. So whatever they were feeding on there, this cold water krill, has either moved away or the whales themselves have chosen to feed somewhere else. But interestingly, they were there because this krill was there that they were feeding on, and they were a little bit easier to swim with there because you kind of knew their pattern. They were going to go down for 9 minutes and feed and come back for 2 minutes and reoxygenate and go down again. And by studying that pattern, you could get close to them underwater. But even there, it was incredibly challenging. I've had film crews go and spend a month there and never get a shot of one underwater, even though they see them every day, because they're just so shy and so hard to get in the water with. But the world is a changing place. I suspect it's global warming related, but now no more blue whales in Sri Lanka. So had I gone in 2021 instead of 2007, I would have found nothing.
That's interesting. I want to talk more about global warming later, but I want to get to some of this ocean giant stuff because I think it's fascinating. What's it like when you swim with, when you were able to swim with the blue whales in Sri Lanka? How close could you get to them, and what was that like?
Oh, close. I mean, if you timed it right, I mean, they're very tricky and sneaky and intelligent. So what you would have to do is sort of, the way we have the most success is by taking a stopwatch and sort of timing their dive pattern, and then also using a map and plotting every point where they would surface so that you could guess where they were going to come up next. And if you didn't guess where they were going to come up next, if you got that wrong, there was no point in maneuvering the boat and trying to get in the right position. You just had to replot the next point and then try again, because they're so shy. If you started zooming the boat around, they go down. So you would really have to get the boat in a position where if you could just gently slide off the side and float a little ways away from the boat, and you'd be in the path of the blue whale, it would swim next to you. But if they detected you, they would go away. So you had to float really quietly on the surface and wait in a path that they were going to take anyway to have them swim next to you. So it's all quite a very delicate process. And yeah, like people would say, oh, I want to, we want to come film a TV show. We want you to film our presenter next to a blue whale. I'd say, guys, like you're dreaming, you might get it, but I've spent years doing this, and I have a handful of really amazing videos and shots right up next to a blue whale really close. But it's a real challenge, and you've got to put in the time and get lucky and have the right weather to make it all come together. But over the years, I've had a lot of success with it, perhaps more than anybody on Earth with blue whales as far as getting close to them underwater.
Can you find them now that they're disappeared from Sri Lanka? Can you find them?
Yeah, there's new areas. There's other places in the world where they're going. There's a spot in Indonesia that's still good. They're not feeding there, unfortunately, so it's a little harder to get close to them. They're traveling, but that means it's a different pattern, different technique, but still timing things right, being in the right position, being quiet, and having them not detect you and swim really close. But again, it's a lot of trial and error and effort, and you go in 10 times and don't see anything, and then that 11th time one swims right next to you, and it's sort of life-changing. So it's worth all the effort. There's a handful of things in the world that are incredibly difficult to do, that take a long time to do them, but if the payoff is big enough, the time is well spent to try to get that payoff.
Yeah, and it's a serious investment, right? You're taking a boat out to sea, which takes several hours. You're trying to find the whales first of all, and then you're tracking them. So it's like literally each one of these attempts is like hours in the making, right?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, it can be years in the making, right? You got to find a place where it's good first. I went to the Azores, didn't find any blue whales. I went to Southern California, wrong time of year, didn't find any blue whales. I went to Antarctica, bad visibility, saw blue whales, couldn't see them underwater because the water clarity wasn't good enough. You need all these factors to come together: reliable blue whales, reliably clear water, reliable infrastructure so you can get a boat to the location. All these things have to be there, first of all, just to be in the right place to have a chance. But once okay, southern Sri Lanka in March from this harbor with this boat is going to give us the best chance, then you got to find them. And once you find them, you can generally stay with them most of the day because they're so big and hard to lose. But getting close to one underwater is a whole different story. You might do 10 drops. They come up every 10 minutes. So it might take almost 2 hours before you get a really good close encounter, even though once you've already gone through all those other steps to be in the right position and in the right location at the right time of year with the right captain and the right boat to even have a chance to make it happen.
And when you're in the water on this successful one, the blue whale literally will swim right up to you and just look at you, or what happens?
Yeah, I mean, they're so big. They're those ones are 80 feet. Other ones get to 100 feet, and they'll swim right past you, just virtually eye to eye. And then to see something continue to go past you really slowly for what feels like an eternity because it's the biggest animal to ever inhabit the planet. I mean, that's a feeling that you can't really replicate anywhere else. You can't be like, well, I'm not going to go out with blue whales. I'm going to do this other thing that's kind of like it instead. Well, there's nothing that's kind of like it. I mean, you have to experience that to understand what it's all about. And there's nothing that compares. So life is full of the mundane every day, day in and day out. And then seeking that spectacular that makes it worth living, I think. And sometimes getting that spectacular takes a really lot of effort. But I'd hate to get to... There's a handful of experiences like that I'd hate to get to 80 and not have had. So it's worth putting in the effort to make those things happen.
What I love about you is that you really believe that, and you are one of the most proactive people I've ever met in my life. And this is just one example. That's what I think I want people to understand who are listening to this. Like, the blue whale is one of like several dozen of these encounters that you have done the same amount of work for, which is like, okay, where on earth can I find these animals, and how do I get in the water with them? And so we're talking about not only large ocean animals, but you've also experimented with sort of large predator animals and safari type stuff as well, right?
And look, not just animals. There's no feeling in the world like wingsuit skydiving. What does it feel like to fly that squirrel suit around the sky like you're an actual bird? Same thing, right? You want to do that, you got to get skydiving certified, then you got to get 100 skydives in before you can strap on the wingsuit, and that time and money and months of effort and stuff. But similar to becoming eye to eye with a blue whale. What does it feel like to fly a wingsuit? Well, there's nothing like it. So if you want to have that experience, if you want to get to 80 and not look back and regret that you don't know what that's like, you gotta put in months of effort to. So yeah, I don't think lists are always a good thing, but certainly for some life experiences, I have a list, and you go through that list and think swimming with a blue whale, wingsuit skydiving, there's whatever else. I mean, a lot of it involves animals and nature, partially because there's a real challenge there that you can't just necessarily buy. For example, you have to actually put in the effort and work to make it happen. But yeah, there's a lot of life experiences that are very unique, that take a bunch of time and effort, but are yet worth making happen because they're incredible.
In all your years doing this, have you had encounters where you were in danger to get hurt or killed?
Sure, there's been a few. There's walrus, for example. They feed on mollusks on the bottom of the ocean, and so they'll get a mollusk and they'll put it in their mouth, up to their mouth, and they'll use their lip to suck the mollusk out of the shell. And their lips are so powerful, and their suction is so powerful, it just breaks the thick shell and sucks the mollusk meat into their mouth. But they can do the same thing to people and to seals. There's been seals where they have gotten a hold of one, put their lips on its head, and sucked its brains out, because your skull is thinner than a mollusk shell and easier to suck on, or on the stomach and suck the guts out. So I've done some things with walrus here or there underwater, where they're pretty aggressive and come towards you, and they're way, way bigger than you are, thousands of pounds. And if they can get a hold of you and get their lips on you, they could suck your brain out. There were some close calls like that. I had a time in Norway, I was filming killer whales in the water, and they had rounded up some herring, had a bait ball of herring they were feeding on. And I didn't see, but a big humpback whale had gone down really deep and started rocketing towards the surface and was going to take the whole bait ball in its mouth all at once, because their mouths open bigger than a car. But I was in the middle of the bait ball, so I would have gone in its mouth. And it missed me by 6 inches maybe from going down its mouth, and then it landed on top of me when it finished lunging through. But thankfully, it was the soft part of the throat that came down on me, so it was a fairly gentle but monumentally scary moment that happened. So yeah, there's been a few. I mean, a lot of the more scary ones are things where it's human inflicted, like you're 10 miles offshore and a storm is coming and your spark plug gets wet. Now the engine won't start, and the heavy seas are closing in, and you're out of radio contact of anybody, and you better figure that out and get to shore, because if you're out there for another hour, you're going to be swept out to sea. Those are the more sort of common ones, unfortunately, rather than being in actual danger from a particular animal.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then with the one where the humpback almost hits you, like, is that something where you die on impact? If that animal charging out of the water hits you, it's over? Or what do you think happens?
I think there's two scenarios there. So the leading edge of the jaw is this bone that's as thick as, say, 10 baseball bats together. It's that big. And if that hit you at full speed, certainly if it hit you in the neck, in the head, in the chest, because it's rocketing up to the surface and you're just floating there, that would kill you immediately. The other alternative is you actually go in the mouth. That would be a more interesting process. I suspect you might not survive that one either. But what would happen is they get a huge throat and mouth full of water, multiple volumes of cars size, and then they close their mouth. And their teeth are like toothbrush bristles. So they close their mouth, and then they use their giant tongue to force the water out of their mouth. And all the good stuff gets stuck against the back of these toothbrush bristles. But it takes a while to force all that water out of their throat and out of their mouth through the toothbrush bristles. And then they use their big tongue to sweep along the back of the bristles and try to push everything down their throat. But their throat's only the size of a basketball, so you wouldn't actually fit down their throat. So they would have to gag then, and I don't know that anybody knows what a gagging humpback whale looks like exactly, but somehow they've got to expel you from their mouth. But that process takes a while. So the mouth closes, the bristles close, you're stuck inside, you're underwater, it's forcing all the water out, you're now stuck against the baleen plates, the back of the toothbrush bristles, its tongue grabs you, sweeps you down the mouth, realizes it can't fit, now gags, tries to throw you out of the mouth, now you're back at the surface. I think you probably are out of breath long before that process completes itself. So that would be almost worse than just getting clubbed by the leading jaw.
Well, I'm glad that it missed, because that would be terrifying. Yeah.
It would certainly be terrifying. Yeah, I tell you, it happened so fast. I wasn't that scared because there wasn't time to be scared. It just happened in a millisecond. But then I had to swim back to the boat because now the humpback is there and it didn't get quite all the herring. So the herring, which is the small fish it was trying to get, congregated around me because they're panicked. They're in a life or death situation and they want any kind of structure to protect them. And I was the only thing in the open ocean that was any kind of structure. So then all the herring came around me in a tight ball with me in the middle. And that humpback went down and lunged through the ball 4 more times, just missing me every time before I was able to actually make it back to the boat and get away from it. And the captain couldn't bring the boat closer because there was a bit of reef between he and I. So he took a few pictures, which are pretty interesting photos of my little head with this humpback lunging right next to my head. So I'm glad I have at least some, and I was recording when the first time happened. So I'm glad there's some video and photographic evidence, which would have been really good at the funeral, I think. But thankfully,
yeah, for sure. For sure. You mentioned earlier when you're kind of talking about your origin story that this isn't something that you got like trained on. Like you're not a marine biologist, you didn't go to school for any of this stuff. Have you found now that you're really legitimately a world expert at this and an award-winning cinematographer and photographer, how does that community respond to the work that you're doing? Are they hostile to you because you're not one of them, or what's been that experience?
No, it's been really positive. The from a science perspective, I work with a lot of scientists. I had a TV series where 8 different scientists collaborated with me to discover mysteries of the ocean. That's Chasing Ocean Giants on Discovery Plus. So I've had a great relationship with lots of scientists, and these people are all geniuses with lots of credentials. So it's easy to be humble around them, and I think they appreciate that I don't try to interject and compete with them on as far as who's a bigger expert. So we end up collaborating a lot, and then I learn a really lot. There is sometimes, I think, some animosity. Wildlife filmmaking is a whole different thing, and it has sort of a more traditional path. You start out as an apprentice, and then you film some lower end shows, and then eventually you reach the top of the mountain, sometimes quite late in life, where you're filming the biggest landmark blue chip natural history shows, Planet Earth, Blue Planet, Our Planet, all of these ones. And I did sort of skip the line in that regard. I have been lucky enough to get right in and film for a lot of these big productions. And I do think, perhaps understandably, there is sometimes some jealousy in that world because I didn't apprentice, I didn't go to film school, I didn't start filming lower end shows. I just was asked to start filming for some of the really big ones, which has been fantastic. And there's been a lot of people really helpful, really nice for the most part in that community as well. But yeah, occasionally I think, understandably so, there are guys who've put 30 years into this who are just getting to that point, who maybe look at me and aren't so pleased with the path that I took. But that can't be helped.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do about that. Getting into those jobs, you were out going on tours yourself, designing your own sort of missions to find stuff and really innovating, right? You were messing around with the camera systems for these encounters and trying to think strategically about how do I get the best shot. And this was all organically driven by your passion. And there's no substitute for that, for something that's like an art form, filming animals underwater.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm not perhaps the most technically gifted at knowing every single camera accessory and setting and this and that. But what I have that some people don't is hundreds of hours with these animals and an understanding of, hey, if we're going to get that shot with the sun behind the whale and the light cascading this way like we want to get, then we need to put ourselves here because that whale's about to make a left-hand turn based on years of experience watching these things. So yeah, there are guys who have more technical expertise than I do. A lot of guys. I've been able to get to know the animals really well, and a lot of these shows, because I'm out there filming on my own, and if you get really spectacular footage, they don't care who you are. If you've got the shots they need to make their show spectacular, they're going to work with you.
Hey guys, this is Nick. I wanted to take a quick break from the episode to share some exciting news. In addition to the podcast, I want to make you aware of some additional content we're putting out. And best of all, it's 100% free. Our Profit Plus newsletter consists of weekly insights about what it takes to find meaning in the pursuit of modern success. This is the place where we explore big ideas at the intersection of markets, business, politics, and life, as we seek to empower our readers to have an authentic impact on the world. If you're serious about finding fulfillment amid success, then definitely check out these additional insights. Just go to subscribe.nickhilaris.com. Again, that's subscribe.nickhilaris.com. Now let's get back to the episode. Now you mentioned your show, the Chasing Ocean Giants. Tell me about that. What was the premise and what were some of the animals that you were going after in that one?
I got a phone call from a guy who was trying to make a show about blue whales. And he had done a Google search and just said, well, I'm looking to make a show about blue whales in Sri Lanka, and I keep coming across your name. As I Google blue whales in Sri Lanka, you've been there a lot. You seem to know what's going on. Could we have a chat about blue whales? And I said, sure. So we did. And then I said, well, I'm going next week. So if you really want to make a show, just come with me for a few days and you can see what it's like in real life. So he did. And we got to know each other. And then he sort of realized, he's like, wow, so this isn't just a blue whale thing for you. You were here during the Civil War before anybody was coming to do this. But you also did the same thing with the killer whale migration to Norway before anybody was onto that one. And you did the same thing with this other animal in this other part of the world. And so I've sort of changed my mind. Rather than making a show about blue whales, I want to make a show about you and your adventures around the world and all of these world firsts that you've been involved in. What do you think about that? I said, look, it sounds fun to me. I'm in it for life. I'm in it in life for adventure and excitement, interesting things. And hosting a TV show sounds like fun to me. So sure, let's do it. So he went away and pitched that show, and Discovery Channel said, yeah, we like that. Let's do 8 episodes, which was great. They said basically, if you had a big budget to go do these things out in the world and in the environment, what would you go do? So I came up with 8 things that I really wanted to go do anyway that were interesting and exciting, finding out why this massive bowhead whale population congregates on a beach in far eastern Siberia every year when all the other bowhead whales are 1,000 miles north of there. Can we get with a scientist and go figure out what they're doing there, why they're there, how they get there, where they spend the rest of their year? Because we don't know anything about these whales. They said, sure, we love it. And I would go do a lot of those things anyway, and I was going to go to 4 of the 8 locations on my own anyway. But the great thing, when you get a film crew involved in a big production company, maybe I can rent a boat and go for a week. But when you have their budget, you can rent a boat and a second boat and a helicopter and a spotter plane, and you can get the best scientists to back you up and come with you and use their information. And suddenly it becomes a whole different, more exciting, more interesting thing, which is what happened with Chasing Ocean Giants. And we did a lot of world firsts with that TV show as well. We did bowhead whales. We were sleeping on a beach in far eastern Siberia for 35 days, no hot water, no shower, pretty basic food. We had a generator, but we answered a lot of interesting questions about that population of bowhead whales, along with the world's leading bowhead whale scientist in Russia. And we filmed the world's first sperm whales hunting squid at depth, 3,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, with a special camera we designed to stick on the sperm whale so it could take it down and hunt thousands of feet below the surface and have these lights come on and film the hunt. So it was great. Yeah, there was lots of interesting things throughout those 8 episodes. And that guy, James Reed is his name. He went on, so he made that series with me, and we're now good friends. And he went on to make a film on Netflix called My Octopus Teacher, which then won James the Oscar. It was the Oscar-winning documentary that year. So it's kind of funny. My silly friend James now has an Oscar on the mantle at his house and is one of the world's premier filmmakers. And he was just a buddy who came to hang out in Sri Lanka and learn about blue whales. And then we made a Discovery Channel series. And we've since collaborated on another feature film about my friendship with a sperm whale called Patrick and the Whale that's doing the festival circuit now and will eventually come out in movie theaters probably later this year.
Yeah, I was trying to watch it, and I realized that it's not available right now.
No, not yet. First, so the way that works is the production company lets it go to these film festivals first, and then I think if you win certain film festivals, then you can ask for more money when you eventually sell the film to Apple or Netflix, or they're really pushing to have a theatrical release and to actually put it in cinemas instead of on streaming. It may go to streaming later, but they'd like to see it go into cinemas. So that sales process is going on right now. We still have a couple more film festivals to go. I'm going to the Transylvania Film Festival next month in Romania, which will be exciting. And yeah, I've been to several. We've been lucky enough to win quite a few film festivals as the best film in the festival. We just had one in the Hamptons day before yesterday, which we did well at. So yeah, it's exciting. That's a whole different process. It's fascinating to see the difference between doing a television show and doing a feature film, because the process is completely different, and you learn different things, get to work with different people. And then the sales process on the back end is much, much different as well. So yeah, it's all been a learning experience for me. I did not set out with plans of hosting a TV show or having a feature film about me come out, but here we are, right? Life is interesting.
To me, it makes sense because the gentleman you just mentioned who won the Oscar, when he encountered you, he knew that there's no one else in the world who could authentically do what you're doing, because you were doing this for yourself. Ultimately, you're like, I want to do this, and you would go to all the steps that a film crew would go to on a budget, on your own budget. You're like, okay, I'm going to make this encounter happen. Here's what needs to go. I'm going to find a boat captain to take me out. I'm going to figure out where this goes. And so there's probably just a handful of people in the world who are doing that outside of the context of like some kind of top-down directive from a TV company or something. Hey, go film this. There's only a few of you out there, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's why Discovery loved it, because they want it makes a really good show if it's authentic. If I'm acting and they've said, hey, here's the location you're going to go to, then it's different. So they were very good with me about, look, where do you want to go? What are the 8 places you would go with a budget? Because it comes across so much better on camera if you are legitimately excited to be there. And if you're like, oh, damn, we actually were able to do that. We totally understand how the manta rays form this vortex only in this part of the world. And then on camera, it's real. It's your real emotions. It's not like, okay, do that one again, but pretend like you're excited. That doesn't come across well to an audience. People respect authenticity and want to see real emotion, real reactions. And look, I'm not an actor. I could probably fake a few scenes if I had to, but people can tell. It's much better if it's authentic and it's genuine. And he saw that, and Discovery saw that, and then we made a feature film after that with Red Bull's production company, Terramata Factual Studios. So yeah, they're not tabbing me to do shows about climbing Everest. Could I host a show about climbing Everest? Sure. Am I excited about that? Is that what I'm passionate about? No. And that would come across on TV, right? You want to find somebody who that's their life goal, and that will make a much better TV program.
Tell us about Patrick and the Whale. Don't give away the movie because I want everyone to go watch it. But it sounds like an incredibly interesting premise, this friendship. But tell us about it.
Yeah, that was interesting. So we were out filming Chasing Ocean Giants actually in 2019, and this one whale came over and was really physical, really interested, really curious, pushing me around, looking at me. It hung out for about an hour with me just on the surface, floating around. It was really quite spectacular. And because we were filming a show, there was a cameraman there filming all of this. And then that show went out, and just before COVID, actually, in 2020, I was back in Dominica in February. And this same whale came again. And this time it swam between a couple friends I had with me and came right over to me. It clearly recognized me from the year before. And she was pushing me around and really curious. Again, stayed for an hour, went down, found her again 3 days later. Similar thing. She swam in between a bunch of people, came over. And this time she lifted me up on her head. So I'm like out of the water on this 30,000-pound whale's head, trying not to panic and fall off. But it was really special. It was really spectacular. And you can tell in the footage that she knew me and recognized me as an individual. And we saw her a third time. So I was just having fun with it. There was nobody there that second year to professionally film, but I did have some friends with GoPros making little shots, and I had a camera. So there is a decent amount of footage from that second year. But I was just texting James, man, check this out. And then I realized this is the same whale from the previous year that featured in Chasing Ocean Giants. And I said, wow, you wouldn't believe it. That same whale of the hundreds of whales in the Eastern Caribbean, that same whale has come now 3 times and found me and lifted me up on her head and tried to mouth my camera and touch it and play with it. It's really spectacular. But that was just because he's my friend, and I thought it was interesting, and I thought he would find it interesting. But of course, James is a filmmaker, so James's thought was, "Oh man, this is crazy. We should make a movie about that. This is your whale friend. We should do that. We should go back next year with a proper film crew and actually document this. If you can find her again, no guarantee I'll find her again, and certainly no guarantee that the third season will be more spectacular than the second season, because you kind of need, if you're going to use season 1 and 2 to make a build-up, when you get to season 3, it better be even greater than what you saw before, or the conclusion of the film will be a letdown. So that's what Patrick and the Whale is about. It's about our journey back to Dominica to try to relocate this whale to try to learn more about how sperm whales live, survive, interact. And I have other whales that I know quite well. I know them by name. They know me. I've seen them for 10 years in a row in Dominica. And so those whales also play a part in the film. And so, yeah, it's really about this sort of love story of this whale who knows me and I know her, and I go back to try to find her. And then throughout the course of the film, there's a lot of information about sperm whales generally, about that population, and about what makes sperm whales so unique and so interesting, and who they are.
Yeah. So did you find her? Did you find this whale?
Well, you got to watch the film. Yes, we did, but you gotta watch the film and see what happens. Lots of twists and turns. If it were that easy, it wouldn't be an interesting film. If we just went and found her and it was spectacular, and we could make a 10-minute film about that, but it's a 70-minute film. So there's lots of things that go on along the way that are hopefully interesting. So yeah, you'll see. So yeah, when it's done with its festival run, it will get released in theaters hopefully, and then eventually on a streaming service. So let's see.
That sounds really interesting. I can't wait till it comes out. And that type of whale, if I remember right, that's the whale that was like the premise for Moby Dick, right? It was a sperm whale.
Right, that's Moby Dick. Yes, they're quite unique. They look much different than humpback whales or blue whales. They have a big head, a lower jaw, teeth. They're one of the toothed whales. And yeah, that was what Moby Dick was a male sperm whale. Yeah, which that's roughly a true story, Moby Dick. So there was whales sinking the Essex and things during the whaling era. So they could be quite aggressive, but generally only if you hit them with a harpoon. If you just love them and cuddle them, then they're quite nice. So
They're yeah. Yeah. Have you, in all your years, you've gone in the water with a lot of different types of whales. Have you ever seen aggressive behavior towards human beings?
never that I can think of. I mean, I had a few incidents, but I'm pretty careful. Like I was swimming with a pilot whale calf one time in the Azores, and it was just a lovely encounter. This little baby pilot whale was swimming underneath me. So she rolled upside down and was swimming underneath me, just 5 feet down, and I'm swimming on the surface looking at her. And we're just having this lovely moment, and I look over, and here comes an adult pilot whale next to me who just rolled over and then bared her teeth, just showed me her teeth, and I thought. I don't know if that's aggressive or not, but I think I'm going to leave the calf alone now and let it swim away. And so I'd stopped swimming, and then the mother calf joined up and slowly swam off into the distance. Well, that was, I think, a gentle reminder about, hey, you're pretty close to my calf now, and you've been there for a long time. And so they're cerebral and intelligent. They're not like sharks. Sharks, they have amazing sensory abilities, incredible senses, some of which we don't have. I don't think you'd call them smart most of the time. Whales are very smart. And so, they don't want to bite strange things. They don't want to have an interaction that might break a tooth or get them an infection or whatever. And so they're pretty good at letting you know, hey, you're too close now. Back up, or this is a situation that I'm uncomfortable with. And then as long as you read those signs and respect them, you'll probably be fine.
What about with killer whales?
No, same thing. I mean, I was actually just in with mammal-eating killer whales last week. I was in Costa Rica. I just flew back day before yesterday, and we had a group of killer whales really interested in our boat. They were following our Zodiac while we were towing it behind our main boat. Some really cool footage, actually. I filmed it from the drone quite a bit of them under the Zodiac, looking at the Zodiac, coming to our boat. So we slowed down and jumped in with those guys, and they're there to hunt mainly, I think, mobula rays, but they'll also take seal or whale calves, really any mammals they can get a hold of. But we jumped in with them, swam around, no problem. They have echolocation, so they know what you are from a long ways away. They can see your heart and lungs and kidneys, and they know that you're not normal prey to them. They can see your swimsuit. They probably don't want that in their mouth. They can see your camera using their echolocation, so they know these aren't things that they probably want to eat, so they kind of leave you alone. The fear would be that it would play with you, right? It would launch you 100 feet in the air using its tail, which they do to seals sometimes. That would kill you with no risk to them of ingesting something they don't like. Could it happen someday? I think it probably could, but I've never had a dangerous experience or an encounter where I was too worried about it. And I've been in the water with a lot of killer whales over the years, both ones that generally eat fish and ones that eat both, and ones that eat mainly mammals. And I've never had a problem. I do think about it sometimes when you're in the water. It does cross my mind.
Yeah, it clearly could happen. Obviously, these whales that were in captivity in SeaWorld, right? They at some point got aggressive, but obviously they probably had a good reason to be aggressive. So there's historical precedent for it. But it sounds like It's not really a thing in the wild.
In the wild, no. I think there's a theory on that says the human, they're mammals. They have a mammalian brain like us, and there is some psychology that says a human in solitary confinement goes a little bit crazy after about 2 years. That's about how long your brain can take solitary confinement before it starts to dramatically change, according to this theory. And that's also the threshold for killer whales attacking humans in captivity. Nothing with whales that have been captive less than 2 years, as far as I understand it. But over 2 years, they get a little crazy and might pull you down.
You've done a lot of work with killer whales over the years, including tracking this special group in the Norwegian fjords where you gave a TED talk recently. And I'm curious just to get more about that story.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that may be linked to global warming as well, right? So that's a fascinating one. There's a herring migration that comes on shore sometimes in Norway, but not all the time. So for that one, we don't quite understand the spring spawn herring migration, but generally speaking, the herring spends most of its life in the mid-Atlantic between Norway and Iceland, 1,000 miles from the coast. But every once in a while, for reasons that we don't fully understand, one class year of herring will decide to swim this 1,000 plus miles and overwinter for November, December, January in a coastal fjord where you can see them from shore and go out there. And following those herring are killer whales who predate on them. And we don't understand why. Usually it's the fourth or fifth year of its life. One class year of herring leaves all the other herring and swims across the Atlantic into the fjords of Norway. But it happens every few years, and that class year will pick the same fjord generally for the rest of its life for those 3 months: November, December, January. So it leaves all the other herring. So to give you an example, in Tisfjord back in around 1997, I might get these dates slightly off, but around 1997, the 1993 herring class decided it was going to spend the winter in a place called Tisfjord. So 97, November, December, January, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002. That class year of herring left all the other herring in the mid-Atlantic and swam to Tisfjord for November, December, January. Then it went back. And with that herring came killer whales that were eating it. Then that class year mostly died out. And so 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, there was no predictable, reliable place to go and find lots of killer whales feeding on herring in Norway because no class year was coming. But then in 2011, the 2007 class year decided to do the same thing, but this time it picked a fjord further north off of a town called Tromsø. 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, the 2007 herring spent its winters, November, December, January, in that fjord. And with it came killer whales. And that time also came humpback whales, because if you look at the shape of Norway, where Tisfjord was sort of off of the normal humpback whale migration route from the Barents Sea down to the Caribbean. But Tromsø is not. It's close to that migration route. So those humpbacks obviously were swimming by, heard all that commotion of killer whales eating herring, and stopped their migration, went into the fjord near Tromsø, and started feeding there in Kaldfjord. So now you have killer whales and humpback whales. But again, that died out. 2017, they were gone. No more 2007 herring. So we were worried there'd be a big gap again between class years, between places you could go to see killer whales near the coast of Norway. But just by coincidence, there was no gap. The 2013 herring then chose another fjord much further north from Tromsø, a fjord called Kranogen near a town called Skjervøy. And it swam into that fjord, and with it came killer whales and humpback whales. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens, because that was 2017. So if you look at the pattern, Tisfjord, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, about 6 years. Tromsø, 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now, Skjervøy, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Are they going to be back this November? It seems to be 6 years is about how long these class years live once they overwinter. Interestingly, now there's a tourism industry for whale watching that has sprung up. So a lot of people have booked tours to go see killer whales in Skjervøy this November. Maybe they won't see any. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that 2017 class year of herring. Are they still alive? Are they, or 2013 class year? Are they going to be there? Who knows? But it's interesting that they also keep picking, every time a class year comes on shore, it's moving north First Chervoy, then Tromsø, first Tisfjord, then Tromsø, now Chervoy. Each of those is a few hundred miles south of the other. So let's see what happens. And is global warming causing that? Is it the warming ocean that's forcing these herring further and further north every time a clash year comes on shore? Again, we don't know. Nobody knows that answer.
Right, because nobody knows. Scientists don't understand why the herring are doing this in the first place, let alone picking different locations, which is kind of fascinating. But it is interesting that in the TED Talk, I encourage everybody to watch it because it's a great talk. But it's interesting that they're going north.
Yeah. What's next, right? At some point, I mean, they're already pretty far north, right? You've got Alta and Hammerfest, and then maybe Svalbard, and then the North Pole. But then where are they going to go? The moon? I mean, what's for the north, right? You're going to run out of north at some point. And if herring crash, we're going to have a serious problem on Earth if the herring population dies out. And even if it's only the spring spawn herring population, this would have major environmental impacts.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This episode of the Nick Halera Show is brought to you by Metros Capital. If you're an investor looking for direct access to real estate investments, then we'd love to talk with you. Investment opportunities at Metros Capital balance financial returns and community impact. To learn more, contact us at metros.nickhaleris.com. Again, that's metros.nickhaleris.com. Now let's get back to the episode. In all your years just being out on the ocean, are you seeing signs of the degradation? We hear about it in the Western media, like about this giant plastic superstorm in the middle of the ocean and things like that, or like coral reefs that are not really growing the way they used to. What are you seeing? You're actually in the ocean, so curious.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's stark. Coral bleaching is absolutely striking. I mean, you could go to the Maldives in 2010 and see amazing, beautiful coral. If you went in 2013, it's all dead. The whole country wide has bleached out coral that happened from one year to the next. And that's global warming directly. That's because coral needs a certain temperature of water to survive, or it ejects its coral polyps and turns bright white and dies. And there are, huge parts of the Great Barrier Reef. I say the Maldives because I witnessed it. I was going there for manta rays for several years, and you would also have this beautiful coral. And then one year, nothing, all white coral. And once it died, there's no coming back. Now it's dead. And so I've seen that happen in several places in the world where, entire countries lose their coral reefs, and they go from these spectacular dive destinations with beautiful coral to nothing. And then all the animals that use the coral reef to survive die. That's happening all over the world in real time. And we've already lost a huge percentage of the ocean's coral reefs, which is awful. So that one is very obvious and very stark. But certainly there's an increase in plastic pollution. We find more junk out at sea, fishing nets, Coke bottles, filthy beaches. I mean, I've been to uninhabited islands in the middle of the ocean and find them covered in plastic because it's floated for a few thousand miles there from India or California or wherever and covered these islands in plastic, despite no human ever setting foot on the island. So it's tough. And the other thing is mass tourism. And I have to take some of the blame for that. You make a big nature documentary or a TV show or put things on Instagram and people think, oh, look at that. I didn't even know there was blue whales in Sri Lanka. Next thing you know, there's 50 boats chasing them around all the time, and then it's no surprise that they leave. So that's another tough one. Social media has caused a lot more people to travel for the wrong reasons, right? They want a picture with a blue whale or a picture of a whale for their Instagram to get some likes. And I've seen this happen a lot. On people come and they ask me questions, and you start talking about the biology and the background and the history, and they're on their phone texting, and then, hey man, I'm just here for the Instagram picture. Tell me when you can take my picture with a whale. That's what I want. I don't actually care about the whales or about anything else. I just want to post on Instagram that I was here. And that's unfortunate as well. And those kind of travelers, which are very prevalent, unfortunately, are putting a lot more pressure on the ocean and a lot more pressure on the animals, and don't want to take the time to necessarily learn the right behavior. But if it's just a still photo and not a video, if you chase the whale hard enough and leap in fast enough, you might be able to get a frame of a terrified whale running away. But hey, if it's just a frozen frame that doesn't show all of that, it's just a moment in time, might look great. You might not notice that actually it was a product of massively aggressive harassment.
That's happened several times to you in the sense that you pioneer a location, essentially. This Norwegian killer whale thing or the Sri Lankan, and then all of a sudden it becomes like the adventure destination for people that are similar to you in a sense, in that they love the ocean and they make a living out of exploring the ocean and making videos and photos of it. But people lead tours, and ordinary people like me could join the tour and get one of these fancy photos for my Instagram feed.
Happens all the time. I mean, one of the biggest challenges I have is going to these new destinations and filming there and enjoying it, and then that balance of trying to keep it quiet, because once it gets out, it's only a season or two before there's 50 boats there trying to do the same thing.
It's that aggressive. Literally, it goes from zero to like dozens of boats out there.
Yeah, I think Instagram really changed that. It used to take 4 or 5 years, but there's so many influencers now who want that picture that once they find out, and there's tour leaders as well who keep an eye on these things and follow other people's pages, and as soon as they see one thing like that from somewhere, they'll message all of their followers and say, hey, I'll take you next year, and they get a boat, and then there's 10 of them out there and 10 of their friends. And yeah, it's a real challenge to try to see these things and witness these things while they're pristine. Well, this happened. Our mutual friend Raul and I did a bit of research. I think it was around 2000, maybe something. No, a little bit later, 2006 probably. We went to a place in Mexico to see whale sharks and mobula rays, and we had to hire a fisherman. There was nobody with a boat. There was no accommodation on the island. It's an island off the Yucatan in Mexico. We were staying at the fisherman's house because there was no hotel, and saw these amazing whale sharks and manta rays. It was absolutely incredible. And he asked me not that long after, maybe 3 years later, he said, hey, what was the name of that place we went? I'd like to take my girlfriend and show her. That was so incredible. And he went, now it's maybe 2008 or 9, and showed his girlfriend. And he came back and talked to me and said, listen, dude, never go to that place again. It was just you and I with that fisherman, a dirt island, and his little boat, and we were the only boat out there. Now the island has 2 hotels and a permit system, and 10 boats go, and there's 5 people per boat, 50 people in bright orange life jackets floating around. And so I've paid attention to that particular place, and now there's not 10 boats, there's 100 boats. And that island is full of hotels, big hotels, 100-room hotels. So that's the state of the world, unfortunately. But at least that one took 3 years for that to happen, or more. Now, with social media and the ease of travel, sometimes it's one season before there's 2 or 3 boats, and then 2 seasons there's 40.
Yeah, capitalism is at work. Crazy. I remember that footage. That's like Holbox or something, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, off Mexico. Yeah,
that was incredible, because there were like, I don't know if it was hundreds, but it looked like a lot of these whale sharks in the water.
Yeah, hundreds of whale sharks, big ones, big 40 whale sharks everywhere, and you can see we're the only ones there. There's literally nobody there. And now,
a whale shark will let you swim with it. Like, it doesn't disappear as fast as some of these other animals. Yeah.
No, whale sharks are very calm. Yeah, they're very easy to get close to.
Have you done any of this crazy open cage shark diving?
I have, yeah. They just closed the place down. We went to film great white sharks in Guadalupe Island, Mexico, and we were filming them without the cage. You'd go down in a cage, and you go out of the cage and film, and then you go back in the cage to go back to the surface. But that was allowed back then with a permit, and now it's no longer allowed. In fact, now they've actually closed the entire Guadalupe Island to any kind of tourism, cage or no cage. But yeah, sharks, of course, compared to whales, are a different thing. You got to be a little more careful around sharks and really know what you're doing. And they're hunting with their senses, not with their brain a lot of the time. And so you got to be careful not to look like prey and to keep an eye on them. And whales are a bit different. But I find them interesting. But I find whales much more interesting just because there's a lot more intelligence there with whales.
Yeah, they're like a social animal, and just a different experience.
The eye, you see behind those eyes, there's some real thinking and real intelligence. You don't get that sense with sharks. You get the sense that they're fascinating and interesting and full of amazing senses, but perhaps not as cerebral as a human being or a whale would be. Yeah.
When you were swimming with the great whites, for example, off Guadalupe, what's happening to you physiologically? Is your heart rate like jacked, or how do you feel under there?
Yeah, you got to be careful. And that time I had some friends along who weren't quite as experienced. I remember 2 sharks came, and that's a little bit, at times when a second shark shows up, you've got to be a little more alert about what's going on, because you don't have to just watch the shark. You got to check your back once in a while that there's another shark there. And I had told everybody to be extra vigilant and be careful. And we got in, and one of the guys we're down at about 15 feet. And the sharks don't really feed down at depth. They might feed on the surface, and if you're floating up there, but they're not going to feed down in the water table because you don't look like an injured animal to them. And I'd instructed everybody how to do this. And we get in, and after about 30 seconds, I see one guy checking his camera, and he doesn't realize he's floating up towards the surface while he's checking his camera. And then here comes this second shark because it sees him going towards the surface. And there was a moment there where you're like, do I put myself at risk and go up there and get him? Or do we just let nature take its course on this one? But I swam up and grabbed his fin and yanked him back down. And he was shocked to find himself at the surface. He thought he was down at 15 or 20 feet. If you're not that experienced and you're checking your camera screen instead of paying attention to your buoyancy and where the sharks are, you can get in real trouble real fast. Thankfully, nothing happened. But yeah, you got to be really alert in a lot of situations with sharks, especially with great white sharks, and especially with multiple great white sharks in the same location.
That animal, even if it takes an exploratory bite on you, it's fatal, essentially. They're just going to mess you up so bad. Yeah.
You might lose your arm. If it's a bite across your torso, it may spit you out. Oh, that's not what I want. But especially in a place like Guadalupe where you're 20 hours offshore, it's a 20-hour boat ride to get you some help. You might have a real problem in 20 hours, even if you weren't dead when it first bit you.
Is that the most dangerous situation you've ever been in? Other than that near encounter that we talked about earlier, is it these shark type things, or is it, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I've had some I was pretty dumb in law school. I was out photographing a moose one time and didn't realize I was used to deer being from Kansas, and deer run away. And I didn't realize that moose don't. And so I was like 20 feet away, and then I was like, oh, wow, look, it's still letting me get closer. And then I was 10 feet away, and I'm like, it's going to run at any point now. I can't believe it's letting me get this close to get these great photos. And then it just full on charged from like 10 feet away. And I thankfully dove behind a tree, and it headbutted the tree. And then it kind of stunned itself and was a bit surprised because it hit the tree. And then I got up and ran away. That was pretty close. I've had a few times with polar bears where they took a real keen interest. We had to run away from a few polar bears at different times, filming in the Arctic. That's happened a few times. So there's been a few close calls. I like to try to be as safe as possible, but sometimes in nature in remote areas, especially when you're really trying to get some amazing footage or interesting behavior, you can find yourself in a bit dangerous situation once in a while. I try to avoid it now that I'm older and more mature.
Yeah, right. And the polar bears, are you in the water with them when you're saying you're running away from them?
No, we had a time when it was a very thin spit of land and a young male polar bear. We saw him out on an iceberg, and we thought, oh, I'm going to fly the drone over there and check this guy out. He's out here on an iceberg. So I stopped looking at the bear to get the drone ready, and I prepare the drone and get it all ready and flew it out to this iceberg. And I get to the iceberg, and there's no bear. I'm like, well, shit, he was just on this iceberg. Where is the bear? And I'm looking on the drone screen. I can't find the bear on the screen. I'm like, well, I don't know where it went. So then I'm flying the drone back to our position, which is a pretty thin strip of land. And here's the bear just reaching the spit of land that we're on, climbing out of the water. And so we fired the gun in the air to try to scare it. And it stopped. It was coming towards us. We fired the gun in the air and it stopped. And then it started coming towards us again. So then we fired 2 shots in the air and it ignored it completely. Then we fired 3 shots in the air, and it stopped for a second, and then it kept coming even faster. So we had to jump on the ATV. We dropped everything. The drone had to stay there. Everything had to stay because we didn't have time. And there was just enough room to turn the ATV around. And we took off on the ATV down this strip of land. But it got thinner and thinner, and then it became water. So we couldn't really run that far. So we had to go as far away as we could and then hope that the bear lost interest and turned around. But which it did eventually. It actually finally lost interest and swam back out to the iceberg. And then we left it alone at that point. But that was not really dangerous. But boy, if you get to the end of that strip of land and the bear is still coming, we would have had some really, really hard choices to make.
What was the conversation like? What your policy? Do you have a policy in that situation? You're not going to go kill polar bears. That's not you.
No, we would have had to try to swim it, I guess, if it kept coming really close. When I've done polar bear guard duty, the rule you take is you have to shoot a polar bear if anyone is in danger. So like if it were you and I and the polar bear kept coming, I would have to shoot you because once you're dead, then nobody is in danger. So I would have fulfilled my duty of shooting the polar bear if anyone is in danger. But as long as no humans are in danger, you don't have to shoot the polar bear. So it would have had to kill us both. And then the polar bear would get to survive, and I would still have fulfilled my obligation of shooting the polar bear as long as a human is in danger.
Yeah. No, that's your priority. I know you're not like a big game hunter type guy who's gonna like murder animals for fun.
Well, look, man, there's 7 billion people. Now, there's only a few thousand polar bears. We'll be all right.
That's an interesting way to think about it, but it's true. Same with these big cats, right? There's not that many of them left either, or elephants, or yeah.
It's a huge problem, right? 7 billion people, and you've got 10 vaquita. 7 billion people, 3,000 snow leopards. 7 billion people, 300,000 sperm whales. That's a major problem, right? 7 billion people and all of these dwindling animal populations. When's that going to stop? And what do you do about it? It's a tough question. But yeah, we are certainly far from endangered, but we are taking resources and land and causing the extinction and endangerment of pretty much everything else.
Well, I got just a few questions. This has been a super fun conversation, but I got a few more for you before we wrap it up. So one of the things I know about you, just because we've been friends for a couple decades now, is that at some point in your life, you developed an interesting life philosophy called the Happy Minutes philosophy, and this life philosophy ultimately led you to do what I think a lot of people would love to do with their lives, and sort of pursue a passion and take courageous steps, like in your case, quitting lucrative career and just saying, you know what, I'm going to go all in on this. I don't have any pedigree, I don't have anything, but I just love this. I'm going to go all in on it. It led you to do that. So just tell us about the Happy Minutes life philosophy.
That happened even when I was in high school. I mean, I sort of look at what people's definition of success is. And to me, our society, whether we like it or not, has interesting definitions of success, but it's normally related to who makes the most money, right? You would say Elon Musk is successful, Bill Gates is successful. The names you're going to pick first are the Warren Buffetts of the world and the people who've made a lot of money, which is fine. And I understand that. But I think, to me, if you get to the end of your life, the most successful people are the ones who are the happiest. And maybe that is those guys. And I wouldn't be one to say money doesn't make you happy, because certainly money allows you to do a lot of things that can make you happy. So it's not irrelevant by any stretch. But most important is, I want to get to the end of my life and be the happiest. And how do you measure that? Well, there's lots of ways to measure it, and there's certainly degrees of happiness. I'm happy to eat a cookie, but I'm more happy to film a polar bear. So there's not, all happiness isn't exactly one for one. But I'd like to get to the end of my life and think that I had as many happy minutes as possible. If I measure every minute of my life and think, how many of those was I actually happy? Was I doing what I like? Was I enjoying it? And if you work at a career that you don't love, and you get 2 weeks vacation a year, and you're only happy those 2 weeks, or you're only happy after work when you're home with your family, you're not going to accumulate nearly as many happy minutes as someone who's doing what they like all day long. And so, I try to formulate a life that gives me the most happy minutes possible. And that's not easy to do. And there's lots of different ways you can calculate it. But I sat down when I was 17 and made a list. I thought, when in my life have I been the happiest? And I made a list. That time with my dog at the creek, that time my mom took me skiing, that time my brother and I went rock climbing. These are the times, whatever it is. This is my list of the times in my life when I was the happiest. And then I thought, how much money will it take to do the things on this list all the time? What do they cost? What are they likely to cost in the future? And then how much do I need to be able to do those things 30 days a month? And I came up with a number. But okay, well, that's my number. Now, how do I get to that number with passive income without having to have a job? And I looked at lots of things, different things to invest in, different careers. And to me, because this was my life, and I wasn't going to take any chances. I could have started a company which could have made hundreds of millions or could have gone bankrupt. The easiest no-risk solution for me turned out, based on my skill set, and everybody's skill set's different, was to go to law school and get a job at a big corporate law firm, because that made sense for me, because it's guaranteed. If you get into one of these certain law schools, you're virtually guaranteed to get a job at one of these certain law firms. And all of those law firms pay exactly the same. And you can look it up on the internet. How much will I make? First year associate, second year associate, third year associate. You know how much you're going to make during your career before you even set foot in law school. And so I just did the math about, well, if I stay 8 years at one of these big corporate law firms, I will have accumulated enough money if I invested at a certain percentage along the way to reach that number on my sheet. So am I willing to invest 8 years plus law school, but I liked law school, into something that will result in the rest of my life having enough money to do the things that I like? That was sort of my thought process. And it wasn't a perfect answer, but that is pretty much how it went. I went to law school. I enjoyed law school. It was fun. I didn't work that hard because I knew I was going to get a job at one of these firms anyway, because if you go to the right law schools, you can be last in the class and still get a job there. I actually did okay in law school. I wasn't last in the class, thankfully, but I had fun and enjoyed it. And then I got a job at one of these big corporate law firms, and I saved my money. When we lived together, I was driving a 1993 Chevy Cavalier, as you recall. And I didn't buy anything else other than that. I eventually moved to Dubai and again, didn't splurge, didn't get a villa on the Palm Island like some of my coworkers did. I just lived a nice life, was happy. I did buy a boat, which was fun, went wakeboarding a lot, but I was careful with my expenses to make sure I was only buying things that made me happy or experiences that made me happy. And I saved a lot. And so after 8 years, I had invested enough that my monthly return for my investments, my fairly passive investments, made enough money that I could do the things I enjoy. And so then I quit. I went into the firm and I quit. And they asked me, which law firm are you going to? I said, no, I'm not going to another law firm. Oh, well, you're going in-house with a client then. No, I'm just going to hang out. No one believed me. They're like, well, we're going to find out where you're going. And I was like, no, I'm telling you, I'm just going to hang out. I'm going to travel. I'm going to pursue passions. I'm going to try to find some blue whales. I'm going to live my life. And someone said to me, oh, well, that's ridiculous. You're going to come back to the firm in a year or two. Everybody needs a desk. I was like, everybody needs a desk. I haven't heard that one before. Is that Socrates? Was that Aristotle? I don't think that's a real quote. I don't think that's, was that in the Bible? I don't know about that one. And so I just started traveling. Yeah, I started traveling, and I got into this wildlife filmmaking and hosting television shows by accident. I was in Norway pursuing killer whales in 2012 or so, and I posted a video on Vimeo because I thought it was cool of these killer whales traveling. And some researcher at the BBC saw this video, called me, said, hey, man, we love this video. Can we buy this? We're going to make a TV show soon, and we need some better footage of killer whales. We sent a team there to film them, but we didn't get anything like this. Can we buy this footage from you? I said, no, I mean, you can have the footage. I'm not even a cameraman. I just a dude traveling around. He said, oh, great. When can you send me the raw files? I said, well, I'm now in Dominica, so I don't have the hard drive with me, but when I get home, I can send them to you. I said, oh, what are you doing in Dominica? I said, oh, I'm filming sperm whales. Well, for who? I said, no, just for me, because it's fun. What do you mean for who? Just doing it. Oh, not for like NBC or Netflix or no, just for myself. Oh, well, we have sperm whales in our show. We'd like to buy that footage too. Are you getting anything interesting? Maybe we should meet when you're done in Dominica. So I agreed to meet with the guy, and I flew to Bristol, where BBC is based. And it turned out that show was a really big show. It was Blue Planet 2, which won tons of awards. It won me a British Academy Award. But then we decided to work together. I had a lot of free time. I had quit my job. And so I sort of accidentally became a wildlife cameraman. And once you work on a big show like Blue Planet 2 that wins awards and things, you get lots of opportunities to work on other TV shows. So yeah, I started doing that. I try to be careful about that too. I keep having to check back on my happy minutes philosophy because it's hard to say no when someone says, hey, we're going to pay you to go climb this volcano in Reunion that's erupting and film it. You hear that and you're like, yes. It's even something like that. If you say yes to everything, you end up spending hundreds of days doing this stuff. And no matter how exciting it is, it's hard to have fun when you're tired, when you're wet, when you're miserable. There's been enough of that I'm now very careful about what I say yes to. And I don't say yes to everything anymore. Because even with my sort of carefully curated plan and happy minutes philosophy in my back pocket, I still have found myself at times having to check back on that and say, gosh, this wildlife camera work is fun, or this hosting a TV show is fun, but like, should I say no to some things? Should I be home with my dog a little bit more often? Should I see my family a bit more often? It's a constant work in progress. I'd love to say I've found that perfect balance all the time, but that wouldn't be true. It takes a lot of checking in to see, am I making the right decisions with my time? And am I doing the things that I really, really enjoy? And that changes over time. When I was in my early 30s, climbing every volcano and filming every whale that I got asked to do was what I wanted to do, and it's what made me happy. As I got into my early 40s now, my balance is a little bit different. I like to be home a little bit more. I like to, take a few less film shoots. I like taking tourists, taking private guests with me to do these things. That's a little different than an official film shoot. I get to film my own stuff. I have a bit more say in what happens every day. You get to see average people who don't do this for a living out seeing whales and their joy and interest. So yeah, it is. I still live by the happy minutes philosophy through and through. It takes some constant checking in. And now this thing I did actually is a movement. I don't know if you've heard. I'm sure you've heard of this FIRE movement, right? Financial independence, retire early, FIRE. I was a little bit ahead of the curve on that. That now that is a movement that people are doing, but that's pretty much what I did when I left my career in 2013, and what my philosophy was starting in whenever I started before I went to law school, 2002, basically. So I was about 10 years ahead of the FIRE movement, but that is effectively the path that I chose.
You're 10 years ahead and also light years ahead because one of your superpowers is proactivity. So a lot of people have the desire to be financially free, for example, but you had the sort of grit and the determination to actually do it, which is actually the hardest part of it all, because you have to make sacrifices in the near term to achieve this long-term goal that you did.
Well, yeah, I had this real jerk roommate, Nick, in Los Angeles, who kept making fun of my 1993 Chevy Cavalier, saying I could never get any girls driving that car, and I should probably sell that car and spend money on a proper car because I live in LA now and he won't be seen. I recall you not getting in my car a couple of times because you were too embarrassed to ride with me to the restaurant because you didn't want to be seen in my car. So it did take some fortitude to stick to that financial plan and not succumb to peer pressure and spend money needlessly.
Yeah, these money hungry, status seeking people that you were hanging out with.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Back on Happy Minutes, do you, as part of your process of staying true to that, do you still do the list? Do you keep lists and journal or do anything like that?
I do. I keep lists of it's been a while since I've looked at it, of sort of things I still want to do. This is going to sound terrible, but I did reach a point with my list where I had checked pretty much everything off. I wanted to swim with a blue whale. I wanted to fly a wingsuit. I wanted to visit these certain places. I wanted to see pandas in the wild. I wanted to track snow leopards. I wanted to do certain hikes in Wyoming. I wanted a houseboat on Lake Powell. There's all these things on the list. I don't have the list handy because there was a time when I had actually checked pretty much all of them off. So it's a question of now revisiting that list and what's next. I am, to be honest, reaching a point. I've now turned down every film shoot that I've been offered for the foreseeable future because the last couple film shoots I went on, some for really big TV shows that are coming out soon, they felt like a job. And I got halfway through the film shoot and was like, I don't want to, if I wasn't working for this production right now, I wouldn't get out of bed and spend 8 hours on a boat tracking whale sharks today, even though it's the biggest whale shark aggregation in the world in a place you can only get access to when you're with a film crew. I still not sure I would do it today. And this is starting to feel like a job. And so I have sort of, I don't know if I've retired from being a cameraman, but I am comfortable in my decision to say no to things like that now because it's something I've thankfully done a lot of, and I feel like, I don't know, perhaps reached the top of the mountain in that profession. I've worked on the shows I want to work on. I've won a British Academy Award. My name's been in hundreds of credits on major film shoots. So I've kind of scratched that itch, I think, and now I'm sort of in a place in life, hopefully not a midlife crisis, but at a place in life where I'm thinking, okay, what's next? What am I going to do for the second half of my life? And I don't feel wedded to anything from the first half, to be honest. I don't have a problem saying no to being a wildlife cameraman anymore, or a lawyer, or any of the other things that I've done in the past. I'm quite comfortable. I think the big revelation there was getting to a point where, because I used to look at these things and think, but what if this is my only opportunity to ever get to Antarctica to film killer whales hunting seals on icebergs? Because you need a lot of permits to do that one in particular. You may never get a chance again if you're not with a film crew to go do it, and you're not going to get offered that job too many times. But I reached a point where I think, what if I never get to do that in life? What if I miss this opportunity? So because I used to think, yeah, well, it'll come around again. And so I don't need to worry. I can say no to this one. I'll get another chance in the future. And that's one thing. But it's another thing to reach a point, I think, where you can say, you know what, I may never get the chance again. If I say no to this, I may never get to go. And I'm okay with that. I'm going to sleep fine tonight. I've done a lot of stuff. And that's a harder one to get to, I think. But I do feel like with some things, I have thankfully gotten there, and I can say no to things that are big opportunities because, I'm too tired, or I want to do something else, or I want to spend time at home. And so, yeah, that's kind of, where I'm at now. But it's, as you said, it's a constant work in progress. I constantly have to check the list, check myself, check my own energy levels, happiness levels, goals. What comes next? We'll see.
Yeah, man, I love that. And I think that the willingness to say no, you have to like actually ask yourself the question that you asked when you're on the film shoot, like, am I having fun and do I really want to do this? It's hard enough just to ask the question and then to really say, okay, I've answered the question and now I'm just not going to do it. That takes an extra level of courage. And I feel like your life arc, so far, I know you're in your midlife crisis, but your life arc up until now has been defined by this willingness to listen to yourself. Like the whole idea was behind Happy Minutes is like really self introspection. Like, what do I want to do? And unlike a lot of people, you listened and you followed it, and it's led you in so many cool directions and your life, and you've still got a lot of runway ahead of you, but it's been amazing so far, and it's been cool to be your friend just to watch you do all this stuff from afar.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, I think it's important to note with Happy Minutes as well that thankfully for most people, and for me included, a lot of stuff that makes you happy is helping people and helping animals and volunteering. And so it sounds a bit on the face of it like a bit of a selfish philosophy, what makes me happy and doing what makes me happy all the time. But a lot of things that make me happy and that make a lot of people happy, and I know that make you happy, are seeing joy in other people, taking people out there to see these whales and be amazed by them and seeing their reaction, or funding a whale conservation project, which we just did in Dominica to help keep whales safe from fishing entanglement with my own money, and those kind of things. Giving a guy from an underprivileged background a chance to be my camera assistant in Norway who'd never seen snow before, never been on an airplane before, doing those kind of things also makes you happy. It's not all personal pleasure and that time I saw a whale or that time I climbed a volcano. And so that important part of Happy Minutes is that a lot of what makes a lot of people happy, and me included, is giving and helping people and helping animals.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because my last question to you actually was going to be like, if you were an ordinary citizen, not an adventure traveler like me, or maybe a head of a business. I don't. It can be anybody, but what can they do to make a difference on these things that we talked about, like on endangered species and the ocean degradation and global warming? Like, what do you recommend, or what would you like to see people do?
You can certainly find worthy organizations to donate to. Like I have one, Blue Ocean Trust, which you can find it online, Blue Ocean Trust, that people donate to that, and I spend the money on worthy causes, finding places where whales need help. I'm flying out to Indonesia to meet with the president of Timor Leste, formerly East Timor, because they have whales there, but they don't have a protection program yet, and that country is 5 to 10 years away from being the darling of the travel industry when they get their infrastructure better, and getting a whale protection plan in place before hordes of people show up to see those whales is important. So donating certainly to worthy organizations, and of course you got to be careful with that because there's a lot of organizations that look good online, but just spend the money taking pictures for Instagram or other nonsense. So you got to be careful to vet those. Obviously, all the things that affect the environment affect whales in the ocean. Global warming is a problem. All of it ties back to human population, right? There's just too many of us. So when you read a bit about that, certainly the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has done a bit of work on what we can do to slow human population growth. One of the major ones, interestingly, seems to be donating to women's organizations in foreign countries, in Africa, in the Middle East. It seems to be the case that when women have equal opportunities to men, to have a career, to have a job, then the birth rates go down in these countries. So donating to women's aid programs and women's education programs in developing countries is a big one that we can do to slow human population growth, which is what's ultimately causing every environmental problem, right? Global warming, too many people emitting things, plastic pollution, too many people using single-use plastic. All of it comes down to there's 7 billion of us on one small planet, and we're pushing every other species to the margins and causing mass extinctions. So yeah, paying attention to all of those environmental causes that we all already know about and have heard of, and limiting those is certainly the best thing that all of us could do.
I never thought of the relationship between the women's rights and women's empowerment and this birth rate, but it's a great point. Because if you look at like the West or whatever, the birth rates have been plummeting for a while, and it's been exactly at the same time that we've gotten smart about how we treat women and the opportunities we give women. It's literally like directly correlated, and in a lot of the rest of the world, that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I mean, you're unlikely to have 6 or 7 kids or to get married at 18 if you've got an opportunity for a great career ahead of you. Yeah, if you look at your life path and think, I'm going to be stuck in this little village with no opportunity to go anywhere or do anything, then you're more likely to have kids at a young age and to have more kids and to get married too soon. If you're thinking, well, I can be a doctor or a pilot or whatever, I'm going to wait to start a family and do those things. And that seems to be one of the major limiting factors on population, is giving women equal opportunities with men. And like you said, there's a lot of places where that's unfortunately still not the case.
I know your movie's coming out, Patrick and the Whale. Everyone should watch that. But in the meantime, where can people find you online, follow your work and your passions?
I've got a website, patdykstra.com. I've got an Instagram page. I am a little careful with the ills of social media, but I do occasionally post. And certainly when the film comes out, you can find that. I'll post about that. That's at Patrick Dykstra Official on Instagram, and a Facebook page as well. You're welcome to follow. But yeah, generally any interesting news that I'm allowed to post and publish will show up at Patrick Dykstra Official on Instagram, and I'll try to keep my website updated. But if I'm honest, I spend a lot of time out doing these things and a lot less time posting about doing these things. So it's not always up there, but I'll do my best to keep those things updated.
That's great, man. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all this information. This was super fun, man. Thanks.
My pleasure. Great to see you, man.
Thank you for listening to the Nick Halera Show. We hope you enjoyed the episode and would appreciate your help with spreading the word by sharing with your network on social. And until next time, remember, it's not about pursuing success to unlock fulfillment. It's about learning how to find fulfillment in the midst of success.